For the past 3 years, I've used my reMarkable 2 nearly every day. It's where I figure out my thoughts, sketch out UI designs, or just take rough meeting notes. It goes everywhere with me, and at this point, it's an essential piece of my kit. And so the promise of a better, more premium version is intriguing. And that's exactly what the new reMarkable Paper Pro sets out to be. But is it actually better? Like in a noticeable, significant way? Well, I've been living with this device and daily driving it, and so I have some thoughts on it. I'm looking to help you figure out if it's worth it for you, and if you already have a reMarkable 2, is it worth the upgrade from what you already have? But before we get into that, if you're new around here, welcome. My name is Brandon, and I'm a product designer who loves helping people improve their focus and creativity. And I'm currently building Playlist, which is a digital planner that understands that the modern human has a lot going on, and staying focused is tougher than ever. Playlist enables you to stay on top of the key things while still creating space to focus on what really matters. I just released it in beta a handful of weeks ago, and I'd love your help in testing and shaping where it goes. If that sounds interesting to you, tap on the link down in the description below to join the beta. All right, let's get into it. It's been a bit over 4 years since the reMarkable 2 released, and you can't help but wonder what took so long for this one. On the surface, the devices look pretty similar, but it may surprise you to hear that almost everything inside this device is different from the reMarkable 2. From a nerding out perspective, that's pretty interesting, but it's an incredible amount of engineering effort for the reMarkable team and a huge amount of risk. If everything inside has changed, does it still feel like a reMarkable? And the answer to that question is a bit complex. So let's break it down into some smaller pieces, starting objectively with the physical characteristics, and then we'll dig into the more subjective things like screen quality and writing experience. The first thing you'll notice when you pick up the reMarkable Paper Pro is that it's well built. This thing feels like something that could have been built by Apple, and it feels perfectly at home next to this MacBook Pro. It's beautiful, and something that you'd have no issue bringing into a boardroom or any other important meeting. It has a unibody aluminum frame this time around and is noticeably bigger, about 30% bigger in the screen size department. You'll enjoy that extra space when writing on it, but maybe less so when carrying it around. Between the additional size and the weight of the aluminum chassis, this device is not nearly as portable as the reMarkable 2 is. When I hold the two side by side, the reMarkable 2 feels more like a toy, whereas this feels more like a tank. I'm likely overstating it a little bit, but this feels more like carrying around an iPad than the paper notebook that you're used to. In practice, the most noticeable aspect of this is the thickness of the device. On the spec sheet, it doesn't jump out as a huge difference. It's 5.1 millimeters versus 4.7 on the reMarkable 2, but I do notice it while writing. Let me give you an example. I love the folio for on-the-go usage, but I'll typically take the device out of it when working at my desk because I want to minimize the gap between the device and the desk that my hand is propped up on. With the folio doubled over, the thickness is more like 10 millimeters versus the 5.1 that's on the spec sheet. Again, it's not a huge deal, but just something that you should be aware of. At the core of the Paper Pro is this new canvas color screen. It's a heavily modified version of e-ink's Gallery 3 display. This is the first production e-ink color screen without color filtering, and in my opinion, it's a significant upgrade over the Kaleido screens that we're used to in every other e-ink device. Historically, I felt the Kaleido screens had more drawbacks than benefits when compared to their monochrome counterparts, and Gallery 3 still has some trade-offs, but this is the first color e-ink display that I actually enjoy using. Let's talk a bit about those trade-offs, specifically white point and black point, which when combined make up overall contrast. When compared with the reMarkable 2, you'll notice that this screen is more gray than white. If you look closely, reMarkable matches the device bezel to the screen brightness to make it feel uniform. It's a clever touch, but you can see the difference in white point pretty clearly. On the other end of the spectrum, you'll also notice that blacks aren't nearly as deep. Where the reMarkable 2 is very clearly black and white, the Paper Pro is more gray and dark blue. It's subtle with typical writing, but it's especially noticeable in big blocks of color like the on-screen keyboard or other UI buttons. If you can overlook the reduced contrast, you get a screen that feels responsive, noticeably more so than the reMarkable 2, but it isn't without some flashy touches. The reMarkable team has done some clever design and engineering to hide the fact that Gallery 3 isn't that fast at rendering color. When you draw a color stroke, it'll first draw in a dark grayish tone, and then once you finish the stroke, it'll replace it with the proper color. This gives you that feeling of responsiveness that's necessary for effortless writing, and I think it's a clever solution to an otherwise difficult problem. But if you have a page with a lot of color, it may take a couple of passes before the page gets to its fully rendered state. I haven't found it to be particularly distracting in actual use, but it's definitely something you'll notice and something I felt that needed to be mentioned in this review. For battery life, there's not a ton to comment on here. The spec sheet has the Paper Pro with 5,000 milliamp hours versus 3,000 milliamp hours on the reMarkable 2, but in practice, I'm charging about once a week, which is a little bit worse than the reMarkable 2, but not significantly so. Just don't expect to see a major increase in battery life by moving up to the larger device. On to perhaps the most important topic, writing dynamics. Because if nailing the writing experience on a digital device was easy, we'd all just write on iPads. But alas, it's not. This time around, reMarkable opted for an active stylus. So what does that mean? Well, it means all of your existing Wacom EMR styluses, styli, aren't going to work with your new reMarkable Paper Pro, and instead is a battery-filled pen that clips to the side of the device. So why the change? Well, this is the first reMarkable to include a front light, so they did this to shrink the display stack to keep your writing as close to the pen tip as possible. So how does it feel? Well, it feels great. The handwriting feels more fluid on this than it ever did on the reMarkable 2. There's no more weird magnetic issues near the edges or when used around other electronics. For those of you who are into technical tests, if you draw long lines, you will notice some curvature in those, but in practical use, I haven't felt any of that when writing. And by moving to an active stylus, I'm hopeful that this means we'll finally get future accessories that can extend the capability of the device. I've spoken for a long time about wanting a pen that could switch between different tools without having to open the on-screen UI. We obviously don't have that yet, but previously this wasn't even technically possible with Wacom EMR. The biggest change you'll notice with the new stylus is that because it has a battery, you're going to want to put it back on the Paper Pro when you're not actively using it to keep it charged. I haven't run into any issues with it running out of battery, but it is a change to my workflow where I'm used to just leaving my pens out on my desks like pens. And you're not going to want to do that with the Paper Pro. The nibs are also different. The combination of the new nib along with a new screen texture means it has a more pencil type sound and feel than on the reMarkable 2. I oftentimes feel like I'm writing with a colored pencil. In my opinion, I think it's a significant upgrade to the standard writing feel, especially for those who aren't going to tinker and try every nib type. The new nib shape and size reminds me a bit of those in the Apple Pencil, but these don't twist in, they just push in. And along with that comes a little bit of this tapping phenomenon, almost like they're loose, even when they aren't. When you tap the tip of this pen onto the screen, you get a bit of that glassy sound, which I don't love. It's not nearly as pronounced as it is on the iPad, but this definitely leans more into that territory than it did with Wacom EMR. I'll have a little bit of a sound test so that you can hear what I'm talking about. We touched on the front light a bit earlier, but I do want to circle back to it for a moment. I love that they've included it because it enables me to use the reMarkable in places that I just couldn't before. But with that said, it is a little underwhelming. It's not particularly bright, and nor do you really want it to be, but it would be nice to have the option to turn it up in certain circumstances. The other limitation is that you can't adjust its warmth. It always has this semi-blue hue to it. It's subtle when on low and gets more noticeable the brighter you set it. I also think that this partially contributes to why the blacks on this device feel more bluish, because if I turn off the front light, that tone almost completely goes away. So on to the key question, is it actually worth it? At $579, this is by no means an inexpensive device. For those who've tried the reMarkable 2 and didn't find success with it, I don't think the reMarkable Paper Pro is going to greatly change that equation for you. But if you're considering spending $399 on the reMarkable 2, the Paper Pro is a much more capable device and is definitely more future-proof. For those of you who already have a reMarkable 2, the Paper Pro is indeed a bigger, better, and more premium reMarkable. But it's not the reMarkable that most users were asking for. The Paper Pro feels like a new product for a new segment. If you do a bit of drawing or sketching in addition to just writing, I think it's especially interesting. I happen to fit well into this segment as a UI designer, and I've found the increased size and ability to render color surprisingly helpful, especially when doing low to mid fidelity sketches for app ideas. This is indeed the best reMarkable for me, but it's not necessarily an easy upgrade recommendation for most reMarkable 2 users. If your use case is primarily black and white writing, this $579 isn't going to provide a significant upgrade over what you already have. If you do feel your reMarkable 2 is getting a bit old and sluggish feeling, and you can't wait until next year's likely reMarkable 3, the closest thing that exists to that device is the boox Go 10.3. It has a sharper 300 pixel per inch Carta 1200 display and feels like the spiritual successor to the reMarkable 2, with its primary hiccup being that it doesn't run the reMarkable software that makes for a truly distraction-free device. If you want to learn more about that device, I'll have a link to that video right here. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time, cheers.